There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when you realize that something about you has changed. You did not choose it. You did not plan it. You were simply living your life, responding to people, absorbing what the world kept throwing at you, and somewhere between all of that noise, a version of you was being assembled without your permission. Maybe you look back at choices you made years ago and feel a stranger looking through your own memories. Maybe you notice how the things you once loved no longer call to you the way they used to. Maybe you feel a low, persistent ache that you cannot name, a sense that life is happening to you rather than through you, that the days are full, but somehow you remain empty inside them. If any of that touches something real in you right now, then this video was made for you, not for a general audience, not for people who have it all figured out. For you, specifically, thine who have been carrying the quiet suspicion that something essential about who you are keeps slipping through your fingers, shaped by forces you never agreed to, molded by expectations you never consented to meet. What if the life you are living right now is not actually yours? That is not a metaphor. That is not a philosophical abstraction designed to sound impressive. That is the most urgent and literal question you may ever be asked. Oh, and the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche spent his entire existence screaming this truth into a world that refused to hear it. He understood, with the kind of clarity that isolates a person completely, that human beings do not simply live their lives, they inherit them. They absorb them from the culture around them, from the family that shaped their earliest years, from the religion or ideology that gave them a framework before they were old enough to question it, all from the social hierarchies that rewarded them for conformity and punished them for deviation. By the time most people are old enough to ask who they truly are, they have already been answered on someone else's terms. And the tragedy is not that this happens. The tragedy is that almost no one notices. Nietzsche called this the herd instinct. And he did not mean it as a gentle metaphor. He meant it as a diagnosis of something deeply, structurally wrong with how civilization operates. The herd does not force you into a pen with visible walls. It does not declare itself openly. It works through something far more insidious. It teaches you to want what the herd wants. It teaches you to feel ashamed of what the herd rejects. It teaches you to measure your worth through metrics you never created, to feel proud when you earn approval from people whose values you would reject if you examine them honestly. The herd does not imprison you. It makes you grateful for the cage. It makes you defend it. It makes you patrol its borders on behalf of those who built it, convincing yourself the whole time that you are free because nobody is pointing a gun at your head. Nietzsche saw this with devastating clarity, and what he wrote about it more than 100 years ago reads today like a dispatch from inside your own mind. Consider for a moment the invisible architecture of a single ordinary day. You wake up to an alarm that was not set by your body's rhythm, but by a schedule designed by an institution. You check a phone that was engineered by some of the brightest minds alive, specifically to capture and hold your attention as long as possible, feeding you a curated stream of images that tell you what beauty looks like, what success looks like, what a meaningful life is supposed to feel like. That you go through motions at a job that may pay your bills, but that rarely asks anything of the deepest parts of you. You come home tired and scroll through more images of lives that seem more vivid than your own. You sleep and repeat, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, you are supposed to be building a self. You are supposed to be becoming someone, but becoming requires resistance, requires friction, but requires the kind of confrontation with your own values that the rhythm of modern life is specifically designed to prevent. Nietzsche understood this before the algorithm existed. He understood it because the mechanism was never technological. It was always human. The concept Nietzsche placed at the center of his entire philosophy was the will to power. And almost everything people think they know about this idea is wrong. It is not about domination. Like it is not about controlling other people, or accumulating resources, or defeating enemies. The will to power is Nietzsche's name for the fundamental drive that defines what it means to be alive at the highest level. The drive to grow, to overcome, to expand beyond your current limitations, to author your own values rather than simply inheriting them. Every living thing, in Nietzsche's vision, either expresses this drive or suppresses it. And the suppression of the will to power is not neutral. It does not simply leave you where you are. It turns inward. It becomes resentment. It becomes the slow, quiet poison of a life that was never truly chosen, a life lived in permanent reaction to what others expect, rather than in genuine creation of what you actually are. This is the part that requires you to stop and sit with something uncomfortable. Think about the last major decision you made, not a small one, but something that genuinely shaped the direction of your life. A career choice, a relationship, a place you moved to or stayed in, a version of yourself you decided to present to the world. Now, ask yourself honestly, how much of that decision came from what you genuinely wanted, from a value you arrived at through your own examination of existence? And how much of it came from fear of judgment, from the desire to be accepted, from the template of a good life that was handed to you before you were old enough to question whether it fit? Most people, if they are honest, find that the ratio is not comfortable. Most people discover that the majority of their largest choices were made not from the inside out, but from the outside in, shaped by a world that had very clear ideas about who they should become, and very effective ways of making deviation feel like failure. And here's where I want to pause for a moment, because I genuinely want to know where you are right now with all of this. Maybe you are watching this because you have been feeling that disconnect for a long time, that unsettling sense that the life you are living does not quite match something you feel inside but cannot fully name. Maybe you have tried to talk about it and found that the people around you could not quite understand what you meant. Maybe you have spent years being what everyone needed you to be, and you are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix. If that is where you are, I want you to know that what you are feeling is not weakness. It is not ingratitude. It is not a problem to be medicated or distracted away. It is the beginning of the most important question a human being can ask. If you are ready to go deeper into that question, leave a comment right now with the words, "I am ready to reclaim myself." Not because it is a ritual, but because saying it out loud, even in writing, even to strangers, is an act of the will to power Nietzsche spent his life trying to awaken in people. And if someone else reads your comment and feels less alone in their own silent struggle, then your words will have done something real in the world. Nietzsche introduced one of his most devastating and misunderstood concepts in a parable about a madman who runs into a marketplace declaring that God is dead and that we have killed him. Most people read this as atheism, as a triumphant rejection of religion. But that reading misses almost everything Nietzsche was actually saying. The death of God for Nietzsche was not a victory. It was a crisis. God, in his framework, was not simply a supernatural being. God was the entire structure of meaning that Western civilization had built its values upon, the cosmic foundation that told people why suffering was bearable, why moral distinctions mattered, why human life had weight and direction and purpose. And when that foundation collapsed under the pressure of modernity, science, and secularization, it did not simply leave people free. It left them stranded. It left them with the full weight of a question they had never been trained to answer. If no external authority defines what your life is for, then who does? Most of the modern world, in Nietzsche's analysis, responded to this crisis not with courage but with avoidance. People did not rush to create new values from the ground up. They rushed to fill the void with substitutes, with nationalism, with consumerism, with productivity culture, with the religion of self-improvement that sells you a better version of yourself while never asking you to define what better actually means or by whose standard you are measuring. These substitutes function exactly like the herd instinct. They give you the feeling of direction without the actual labor of self-authorship. They let you feel like you are building something without ever requiring you to confront the foundational question of what you actually value and why. And this is precisely why so many people in the modern world experience that peculiar combination of busyness and emptiness, that feeling of doing everything right and still feeling like something essential is missing. Nietzsche's answer to this crisis was the concept of the Ubermensch, the overman. And once again, almost every popular interpretation of this idea distorts it beyond recognition. The overman is not a superhuman. He is not a conqueror or a genetic superior or a leader of masses. The overman is Nietzsche's image of a human being who has done the hardest thing possible, looked honestly at the collapse of inherited values, resisted the temptation to simply replace them with new inherited values, and undertaken the terrifying and exhilarating work of creating meaning from within. The overman does not need the herd's approval, because the overman's values did not come from the herd. He does not need external validation, because his sense of worth is not borrowed from others. He does not live in resentment of those who are different, because he is not defined by opposition. He is defined by creation, by the ongoing, never-finished act of becoming who he actually is. What Nietzsche is really pointing toward, underneath all the layers of provocation and poetry, is something that is both simpler and more demanding than most people expect. He is pointing toward the practice of radical honesty with yourself, about what you actually value, not what you were told to value, not what earns you approval, not what makes you feel safe inside the herd, but what genuinely calls to the deepest part of who you are when the noise goes quiet. This practice is not comfortable. It requires you to look at the life you have built and ask whether it reflects you or whether it reflects the accumulated pressure of everyone else's expectations. It requires you to sit with the possibility that some of what you have called your own identity is actually borrowed, absorbed, inherited from sources you never consciously chose. And it requires, perhaps most painfully, a willingness to begin the process of reclaiming authorship, even when the people around you preferred the version of you that was easier to manage. Your life is being shaped right now, not by destiny, not by forces entirely outside your control. It is being shaped by whether you choose to examine what is shaping it, or whether you let the shaping continue without your awareness or consent. Nietzsche did not offer comfort. He offered something rarer and more valuable, the invitation to become real, to stop performing a life and start living one, to take the full weight of your existence into your own hands and refuse to outsource the question of your own meaning to institutions, ideologies, or the quiet tyranny of other people's expectations. That invitation is not easy to accept, but it is the only one worth accepting, and it is here, right now, extended to you. If this reached something in you today, if it named something you have been feeling but could not put into language, then do something small but meaningful. Press the like button, not as a gesture toward an algorithm, but as a signal that this kind of depth matters, that there are people out here who need philosophy that speaks to their actual lives and not just to academic shelves. Every like tells the world that this conversation deserves to be heard by more people who are quietly struggling with the same questions. And if you want to keep going deeper, if you want each week to bring you another layer of Nietzsche's thought applied directly to the life you are actually living, with all its weight and all its unfinished edges, then subscribe to this channel. It was built for exactly the person you are right now, someone who suspects that life has more to offer than the version they have been handed, someone brave enough to sit with difficult questions, and someone who is not looking for easy answers but for real ones. Every video here is made for you, and the next one is already waiting.